There's a pretty one, Ulysses. There it is.
Mikiko is back, and she's joining us today from London, Ontario. Mikiko, hello.
Hi.
We are here to talk about a really fascinating little novella, Voting Day by Clare O.D. It's come out from this Fairlight Books, Fairlight Moderns, I believe is the name of the series.
Yes.
And it sounds absolutely fascinating. Tell us all about it.
It centers around 4 different women who are living their lives and are focused on the voting day that's going to be coming up.
So this is based on a real event, which is unfathomable to me. It's set in 1959 in Switzerland?
Yes.
And there's a referendum. And what's the topic of the referendum, Mikiko?
It's whether or not women should be able to have the right to vote.
And who can vote? Who could vote? And this is actually true historical event.
Yes.
And who could vote in the referendum?
Men can
No
vote.
women could vote, only men. And what was the result of the referendum?
67% of men voted that women should not have the right to vote.
So women still couldn't vote.
No, not until 1971.
71, I looked it up too.
Yes. Yeah.
And in one little canton, not until 1991 on local elections. Oh,
yeah.
God.
But I mean, Canada was the same way. In 1960 was the first year that women of any nationality could vote.
Absolutely.
So it's still,
Absolutely.
it's
all infuriating, and it's not.
Yes.
It's not just Switzerland, but I had no idea that Switzerland was so backwards. So
I didn't either. There are some characters who are focused on the outcome of this vote, and then there are some women who are not. But they're all going through something in their own lives that it overlaps with another character's life, and essentially it kind of focuses on the fate of a foster child, and whether the women know it or not, they are connected not only by the results of the vote, but of course what happens to this foster child. So it's really interesting to see the ways in which their stories overlap, even though they're all at different points in their lives. Vreni, who's a farmer's wife, is kind of thinking back on her life and thinking about all the things that she didn't do as she prepares for a medical procedure, which she has to travel to Bern for because this takes place in Switzerland. And then you get some overlap as she meets with her daughter, Marguerite, who is working, they call her an office lady, but it's an office or secretary position, but she's in administration. And so she takes time out of her day to meet with her mom before the medical procedure takes place. Vreni then encounters both an administrator and a cleaner at this medical facility who also both play a part in her life, and then of course this foster child. So it's really interesting just seeing the ways in which all these women are interconnected. Yeah, it's really fascinating. It's done brilliantly, just really well written for such a short book, like Claire Keegan's Small Things Like These. Just really well done.
You've got my attention.
Good.
It's depressing, the fact that the referendum was not successful.
No.
Is it a depressing book? And do the women learn the end of the result of the referendum by the end of the novel?
They do learn the results of the referendum by the end of the
novel.
That's
not a spoiler because it's a
That's
story.
not a spoiler, no. But it's not depressing. I think it's compelling because it's women really taking a look at not only their lives, but how this decision will impact them and has up until this point. And I think what you're seeing is just, I mean, maybe for Beatrice, it's slightly different. There is an age difference in comparison. She's 61. And so she's at the height of her career, even though she's a bit older and she's successful, and she's definitely thinking about what this means. And she is part of a suffragist group. So, it does end on a bit of a note where she is just devastated, but there's still something about it. And maybe it's OD's writing, or it's, a bit of a more hopeful tone at the end of the book, but there's still a light at the end of the tunnel.
I wonder if Clare O.D. is going to write a sequel about what all these characters were doing in 1971.
Actually, I did check to see if there were any plans, and she did say that she's not planning a sequel that would involve all of the characters that are in this book, but she would be interested in following one or two of the women to see, what happens for them and where their lives end up.
Clare O.D. is fascinating. She is Irish and has been a journalist for decades, and she is based in Bern.
Yeah, she's been there for over 13 years.
She's written nonfiction otherwise, The Naked Irish, which I think I've heard a little bit about.
I actually haven't.
It's a portrait of a nation beyond the cliches, and then also The Naked Swiss, A Nation Behind 10 Myths. So
yes.
Those are journalistic, and those sound pretty interesting too. So this is her first novel. Did it in any way read like a debut? Is there anything that you sound very passionate about it? Is there anything that didn't work for you?
To be honest, actually, it was quite flawless. I'm not saying it was perfect, but in terms of, I couldn't tell that it was a debut novel. I didn't even know until I looked it up. So it was impressive. But she has a background in writing, so
the character development didn't take a backseat to the kind of political social political messaging of the book or whatever.
No,
Yeah,
it's I feel like it's more like a framing device and more of a way to highlight the connections between the women, to be honest. Obviously the result does play a factor in the overall, lives of the women, but it really does seem more like a catalyst for what they're all going through. For example, you do have Rennie, who is a farmer's wife, and she does think about what she does on a daily basis and how her family is going to react, because she's going to be unable to do anything for her family for 6 weeks. And it's just a kind of like, well, they're going to have to deal with it. And what's this going to look like? And, the doctor has said, I can't do anything for 6 weeks. Her family relies on her for pretty much everything. It's very clear that it's a patriarchal society that they're living in.
The connection, as you explained it, between several of the characters is quite tangential, but there's something you're hinting that the way that the novel is tied up at the end, or maybe tied up is not the right word, but the way that the novel ends, the connections, there's more than meets the eye.
Well, you definitely have focus on the foster child, who is what really does tie the women together. And I think the one thing that you do realize is that they all do want to do what's best for him. And I think that's another thing that does, tie in at the end. Yeah.
You have totally sold me once again.
Good.
It's a short one, so I'll probably get to it sooner rather than later.
Good.
Thank you so much.
No problem. Thanks for having me, Sean.
This is an extraordinary pleasure for me to welcome Leo from the fabulous BookTube channel, Leo Bancroft, to Bite Size Book Chats. Leo, hello.
Hello. Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
We popped a few cherries to have this Zoom chat because Leo is my first trans mask guest.
Yes, and I haven't been on any Zoom collabs like this before, so this is very exciting.
Yes, we've already drank our Manhattans and swallowed the cherries, but you have to believe us.
No.
Leo, tell us about your fabulous BookTube channel.
Oh, yes, thank you. So I have Leo Bancroft is the name of my channel, and I cover a lot of different genres. I read whatever is interesting. I'm trying to read a lot more diversely. One of the things that draws me to your channel as well, actually, is all of the great books that you recommend, and trying to do things. I'm participating in the Black Classics Book Club, and I'm trying to read a lot more queer authors and so forth. And so I've been really enjoying BookTube as a way to broaden my reading horizons and also connecting with other folks and building this great community. One of the things that I'd like to shout out is, if I may, my recent and first original book tag, which is the hashtag Stand With Trans Kids book tag. And I would love, love, love for all of you to check it out and do the tag. Anyone who's watching this video, please consider yourself tagged. And I think that even if you're not really familiar with trans lit or trans authors, I think it would be just so fabulous to have the point of the tag is to, always get to know more about people, but also to have people proclaim publicly that they stand with trans kids. So I would love that.
I was talking with Leo off air about the fact that several fabulous booktubers have already done it. I'm proud to say that I was one of the original taggees, but I have been a little busy, haven't done it yet. And when I've watched the other booktubers' videos, it's like I think they've exhausted the list of trans lit that I've read. But I said to Leo, I'm going to research and find some new to me trans books, trans authors that I want to talk about instead. And about half of the prompts are not specifically about trans lit, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yep, there are a lot of fun prompts, I think.
There's a fabulous prompt. So everybody go check out Leo Bancroft's channel. I haven't said yet where you are located. Portland, Oregon, I believe.
That is true, indeed.
So we are here to talk about a novel that, as far as I understand it, doesn't have any GLBTQ plus themes, but is by a trans male author, Zeyn Joukhadar, and the novel is called The Map of Salt and Stars, which I believe is his, and his pronouns are he, him, they, which I believe is his debut novel, but Leo will correct me if I'm wrong. Please tell us about it.
This is a fabulous book that came out in 2018, and I first ran across it. Shannon at That's So Poe had talked about reading it and being really drawn into the story, and so I picked it up as well. So I knew that it was about a kind of a Syrian refugee family. And so that's why I was a little like wondering like how heavy would it be, or how, how hard would it be? Especially things are hard in the world right now. And sometimes it's not always easy to pick up a book of a heavy topic. It was just the prose and the characters are just so beautiful. I just couldn't put it down. The premise is that Noor is a 11-year-old girl. It's in 2011 in Manhattan. And at the start of the story, her father has just recently died from cancer. She was very close to her father, or her Baba. So she and her two sisters and her mother are all really beset by grief. And right at the beginning of the story, then the mother moves the family back to Syria. And so the story opens. The part that really drew me in is the 11-year-old is remembering her father and his love of storytelling. And she goes out into the garden and into the where there's this fig tree, and she kind of puts her face into the dirt and starts telling the tree the story that her father always told her, hoping that it'll sink through to the earth, to the other side where his grave is in Manhattan, and keep them connected, which was just powerful imagery and written well. Like, I think if that were written poorly, it would. So that starts the second timeline. So this is actually a dual timeline story. The first timeline is of our protagonist, Noor, the 11-year-old who's moved back with her family to Syria. The story then that she's telling to remember her father is the second timeline. And that is the story of Rawia, a teenager 800 years previously in the same location, who runs away from home in order to apprentice herself to a map maker in order to support her family and have adventures and use her mind and all of these things. And so the story cuts back and forth between Noor and Rawia. Then what happens is, this is 2011, I think 2012. So then the city that they're in starts getting shelled, as we know that Syria was under, a lot of violence, attacks and so forth. And so the family's home is destroyed, and this all happens fairly quickly, and they leave with a family friend and begin this journey of trying to find a place to stay, they're refugees now. And then their story and the geographical course that their path takes mirrors the geographical path that Rawia's course takes. And it's just stunning. It's just stunning.
Do you happen to know if the ancient or the older historical story is a real work of Syrian literature, or did it come from Zeyn Joukhadar's imagination?
Oh, that's a great question. I think that it's rooted in the history, but I think it's from his own imagination. If I recall correctly from watching your channel, you're not a huge fan of child narrators.
It has to be done really well.
Yes. And so I said that this was a child narrator, and I didn't want you to be afraid. It's done so well. It's not precious, but it's also not obnoxious. I think it's a really clever way of having us kind of enter into the life of this refugee family without some of the maybe overarching, like getting into the political stuff. It's not about, what's happening at the grander level. It's really just about the journey and the family and the connections. As well as some of the other themes. So I had to put that out there. Don't let that turn you off.
I shan't. So if it's a spoiler, don't answer this question, but
Okay.
How about the salt and the stars of the title? The title is The Map of Salt and Stars.
Yes. So it's not a spoiler. So that's a great question. One of the things that Zeyn Joukhadar does really well is use just imagery. So the salt, one of the definitions of salt in the book, meanings of salt, comes up right in the beginning. The child describes how salt is everywhere now in their home because of her mother's tears at the death of her father. And so salt is tears, but salt is also referring to bodies of water and so forth. And then stars, a lot of that is in reference to the astronomy of both the contemporary time, but in the 800 years previously, when Rawia is following this map maker, they use astronomy and astrolabes and trying to calculate. Their goal is to map this unmapped area, and so they depend on the stars.
Now, one of the things that I struggle with, in addition to child narrators, because it has to be done really well, is that I often find, too often for my liking, when there's dual storylines, I end up being more invested in one than the other. That didn't happen for you?
I think I was more invested in the contemporary storyline, but I think that's okay. I think in a way, for me, the storyline in the past gave me a little bit of a break from the tension of this family and the suffering they're experiencing as they're trying to find safety. I mean, there's still humor and connection and joy and beauty in their story, but like they're refugees fleeing war with other refugees fleeing war and facing border crossings and all of that. So I think for me, I was definitely more emotionally invested in that story, but it was kind of okay because then I could kind of like, okay, now we're in a different storyline.
And I imagine that the purpose of the historical storyline is to add some dimension of meaning, significance, cultural, kind of like a palimpsest type of thing at work in undergirding the contemporary story. And so if that's its sole function, then it would make sense that it might just make you more invested in the primary storyline.
I think you might be onto something. Even just like one of the features in the historical storyline is there's a giant legendary bird called the Rock that is like attacking the city. And so like then you can kind of draw some parallels of, that giant bird attacking the city, the bombs attacking the city, that kind of echoes what you're talking about.
Oh, you said offline before we got started that there's potentially a little bit of queer stuff going on in the book. So
I think so. So both of our female protagonists, so both Noor and Rawia at times then in the story cut their hair and go as boys, pass as boys. Rawia in the past, she does that because she wouldn't have the option to apprentice to a map maker. So she has to hide her gender in order to join this crew, and cuts her hair and does so successfully. And then at some point in their journey, Noor also has her hair cut in order to protect her as a young girl fleeing in that situation. And so for neither one of them they don't explore too much, a sense of like queerness in that. But
gender bending for the purpose of survival.
Yeah.
Show us your t-shirt, Leo. I don't usually my guests do this, but
yeah, I had. Let's see if I can do this without falling over. Oh, geez. Okay. Yes.
T-Rex. That's fantastic.
I had to wear that. I had to.
This is your first appearance on Bite Size Book Chats, but I hope it will not be your last.
I hope it will not be my last either. This was lovely. Thank you.
I'm about to have a conniption. I'm so excited that Heather of Soggy Expat Booknerd is here. Heather, hello.
Hello.
Oh, that is one of my favorite things about you, is the way you say hello at the beginning of every video. Can you do it again?
I don't know how I do it. I like put it on the spot. I probably don't know how to do it.
Okay.
But is it like the Queen? Is it like hello?
No, it's this most genuine hello. Concentrated in your intonation of that word is just this mega dose of friendliness and sincere interest in the person receiving the greeting that nobody else uses in the whole planet. It sounds something like hello.
That's gonna make me self-conscious now. Next time I try to say hello, I'm gonna be like.
Well, I don't want to do that. Heather is the channel Soggy Expat Booknerd is one of my very most favorite channels. If you haven't discovered Heather's channel, you must go check it out immediately. And Heather is joining us from Wales. She is an American expatriate in Wales. Why are you in Wales, Heather?
Oh, a long story, basically to do with me following a guy home like a lost dog.
Well, you followed him quite a ways home.
Yeah, and I never left.
And you and your Welsh husband have a beautiful daughter. How old is she now?
She's 7.
Ah, she's just a princess.
Oh, thank you. It's because I never let her have tantrums on TV.
Oh, yes. the joy of the beauty of editing, hey? And Heather is a big proponent. In fact, I think you are more than a proponent. You're kind of the booktube department head for Delwithon, are you not?
I think so, yeah, only because I'm the only one that likes it, I think.
Well, I have participated. This is my second year, but I mean, I'm still participating. It's the end of April. Delwithon is April?
March.
Yeah, see, so that's how far behind I am, but I have good excuse for
It's very Welsh of you, though, to not finish until 3 months later.
Oh, there you go. And please give a shout out to your own channel. Tell us about what do you do over on Soggy Expat Booknerd, and please start by explaining the title. I think I can understand everything except Soggy.
So Soggy Expat Booknerd, yeah. I don't know. So I've always been this soggy tourist. Like my very first email ever was the soggy tourist, because every time I go anywhere, I always end up drenched somehow.
And then something to do with the fact that you live in the UK.
Potentially, but I think in Hungary it was just beers. Everyone spilled their beers on me. I think I'm like a magnet for beers. Don't know, but it was sort of like a joke, like, oh, I'm the soggy tourist, and then I thought, oh, I'm not a tourist anymore. I've committed. I've emigrated. It's over. I'm now the soggy expat.
That is fascinating. And you are a work in progress in terms of being able to speak Welsh. Is it right?
Yeah. So
can you say the name of your channel in Welsh?
No.
There's your homework.
I'll Google it. I'll write it down. Yeah, write it down right now. Yeah, I don't know how to say soggy or expat.
What do you do over there on your channel?
Dear God, just like mess around, really. Like I know people have like, very cultivated channels where they do this specific, literary thing and in a timeline or whatever. Unfortunately, that's it's just whenever I have time between going out drinking, going to work, messing with my kid, I've read a book, I want to chat about it. That's unfortunately all it is. It's just me sort of coming on quickly and going, guys, I read a book.
I would say it's much more than that. I mean, you are a master at vlogging, as I call it, vlogging. You really show. I get a real feel for Wales from your vlogs and your family life, and you also talk about the way that you read in a way that it's very personal without being oversharing.
Oh, thanks.
And I'm somebody who's a very much of a subjective reader, so I really respond that to you. But you're just one of the funniest. You are, I think, the funniest person on BookTube. So I wasn't gonna. I think you were being too modest, so I had to add my own editorial comments. So if you haven't checked out Soggy Expat Booknerd, go there directly. We are here to talk about a Welsh novel that Heather loved. I think it was the highlighter of her Delwithon for March. It's called The Blue Tent by Richard Gwyn, and I had never heard of it. Heather's going to tell us all about it.
Richard Gwyn the author, I found the book and everything because he actually works at the university that I work in. Like, obviously he's a lecturer and I am not. But I found it through like a student magazine or something. So the book itself is like, it's like heavily influenced, right, by ancient alchemy and stuff like this, and by sort of medieval Welsh legend. So I was like reading it in Dewithon and reading these other like Welsh legend books, and it like really fit in really well. You know, Borges.
Yes.
Borges. Yeah. So
not that I've read him, but I know who he is.
Yeah. He's like, all these crazy like stories about infinity and like the Aleph and like multiple universes and stuff like that. And I would never be able to read Borges because I'm not clever enough. Like, I just would not get out of that what I want to get out of it. So this book uses all those things, and like morphs them into like a level that I can find entertaining. But like basically it's this guy, right? So he's like in his 40s, like early 40s or whatever, and he lives in rural Wales where he grew up, and he inherited this like 14th century manor house from his crazy aunt, where she was like an eccentric sort of spinster woman who like was a psychiatrist and blah blah, and she like worked at like the mental institution down the road and blah blah. So his mother died when he was 6, and then his dad sort of traded him in for a new family, and she basically became like a surrogate mother. So he's inherited this house and her entire library, and like in the will she's like, you have to keep the library intact. It's like a part of the will, like you have to keep it together and you have to pass it on or whatever. And then she left him like a note, like specific intense like mind puzzle note. Like it was like one book opens the other, read many books and compare them throughout, and then you get the meaning, blah blah blah. So he spends the whole time like just wandering around this house, like he's an insomniac, and like the author's an insomniac as well, and he sort of has interviews where he said like, in an insomniac's mind, like nothing refreshes, every day sort of runs into the other, and it becomes like you separated from reality, like everyone else is living in a different reality to you, because you never get this like refreshing sort of thing. Like he just sort of like, his whole life is populated by sort of periods of him falling asleep in the chair in the library for like 2 hours or whatever, but he spends all that time going through this library, like trying to figure out her puzzled note. And like just randomly one day, like a blue tent shows up in his yard, and he's like, what the fuck? Like, this is my yard? I mean, like all of this countryside, this vast countryside, and you just put your tent right in my yard? Like, why? So he becomes obsessed with the tent. He like goes in it, he like goes around it, he's like looking, he's like, this is some bullshit. So then he finally goes in it, and he falls in all the way. Like he goes in and like just sort of like rummaging about like normal, like a cat, but then just like falls in all the way and experiences this like intense blueness, this like period of like blue sensations like overcoming, and all he can like think to describe it is like this vast blueness, and he like falls asleep. And he wakes up and he's like, oh shit, I'm in someone else's tent. And he like runs out and he runs into the field, or like up into this like cliff thing. And he's just like looking down on the tent, like, what have I done? I've been sleeping in someone else's tent. And then he sees this girl just walking up. She's like picking wild flowers or whatever. And he's like, oh, where the fuck did she come from? And then he's hidden from her because he's in like this, in this like high up ridge cliff thing. He's completely hidden. But instead, she just looks up. She like sees him. She's like, see you, mate. And then she just walks into his house, and he's like quite an awkward sort of like introverted sort of dude, and he doesn't know how like all of these like confident people that come into this book, into his life, he's just like bumbles around them. He's like, you just got into my house. I don't know. So he like follows her in, and they have this chat. Turns out this tent, right, it was given to her by his Aunt Megan, this like eccentric woman who owns the house. And so he like gets to know her, and they sort of go around doing all this stuff. But then like some crazy stuff happens. Like I don't want to tell you. Like, it's all maybe potentially a spoiler. But she gets really ill. She starts acting crazy. He sort of comes home from town after he's gone to get her some medicine, and she's like standing in the yard, just like an ethereal sort of like possessed being in like an old nightdress or whatever. And he tries to sort of like fix it or cope with that or whatever. And he's like, I gotta go in the tent again. I gotta do it. He goes in the tent again, falls asleep again, and has like a different experience, but still like a calming, like ethereal sort of experience. And then as a result of him going in again, it coughs up a new dude. the tent, it just, every time he goes in it and he sleeps in it, it coughs up new people. And you end up with like 3-4 characters, something like that.
And now, Editing Sean has made an executive editing decision to just cut it off abruptly here because I think she's more than sold the book and I'm running out of time and space in this episode. So go check out Heather's channel and go check out this novel. I sure will be.
Thank you for telling us about this book. Will you come back soon and tell us about another?
100%. Yes.
Oh.
Just let me know. I love you. I love your channel. I would 100% love to come back.
I'm excited to welcome a brand new guest, but somebody who we have been kind of colleagues. I don't know if is that too officious of a word. We have been fellow book enthusiasts on bookish social media for several years, dating back to the good old Litzy days. Robin from Sacramento. I keep saying Sacramento. I guess when I think of you, I just go all spiritual. But Robin from Sacramento, welcome.
Thank you, Sean. It's really a pleasure to be here and talk with you.
You have great taste in books. And so the first book we're going to talk about is an African-American novel called Maud Martha by Gwendolyn Brooks. Do we know when it was published, actually?
1953, I believe.
Okay, so please tell us about this.
So I'll give you a little context of how I came to this book. And I'm going to hold up the current book that I received today in the mail just before we started talking. It's a new edition from Faber and Faber. And it's got a really great cover.
Yeah.
The dandelion on the cover, which actually connects to Maud Martha and her character. I'd had this on my TBR for several years. And the book Cougars, Emily and Chris, decided to do a buddy read of Maud Martha, and they asked other people if they wanted to join along.
I missed that.
I said, well, hey, this is my time to read Maud Martha. So I'm really glad that I did. It's one of those books that you can read in one sitting if you want to. It's actually kind of hard not to in a way. But Gwendolyn Brooks is really mainly known in the United States, at least, as a poet. And she has a very distinguished career. She wrote for 70 years because she started as a child writing, and her parents encouraged her in that. But this was her only novel. And I was looking up a little bit more about Maud Martha because I was interested in why she didn't write any other fiction. And apparently this book, before, she actually tried to get it published as poems, and it was rejected. And then she, I think, redid kind of the structure of the novel and published it in these, they're like little vignettes of the character of Maud Martha. And I would say it's kind of written a style of prose poetry. And what I really love about the book and the language, which is just extraordinary, is that you get a piece of Maud Martha's life from the age of, like, she's only 7 to when she's an adult and just about to have her second child. But in between those vignettes, there's a lot that's not said, and time passes. So you're left as a reader to kind of imagine what was going on in her life during those periods of time. So that I thought was a really interesting way to structure the novel. And what she does is she uses her imagination in the vignettes to really look at the small moments of her life that may appear to be humdrum, but she uses her imagination to make them really special. And it's very much like, anyone's life in terms of those events that happen to all of us. It has childhood in there. It's got marriage. It's got, family deaths that happen along the way. She is a poet. She is very careful in her word selection and how she can create these scenes with very few words that just really have this, they sneak up on you, I think is what it feels like. They just really sneak up with you with the power of the vignettes and her language. And this is primarily set in the 20s, 30s, and 40s in Chicago. Gwendolyn Brooks actually grew up in Chicago in the same neighborhood. And so you can just tell she was an observer of life somewhat autobiographical, but not, there's things that she changed in it for sure. And the other thing that she does really well is to describe the racism that was present all through her life. Those experiences that she had, when I'm reading them, I'm kind of gasping and just going, oh my God. But the way the character deals with it, she turns it around to not let it destroy her life. It's really a novel of self-discovery.
Going back to this narrative emphasis on celebrating the quiet moments, the small moments in life, the image of the dandelion is intimately bound up in all that, isn't it?
It is. In the beginning, she's talking about other types of flowers that might be more exotic and rare, but the dandelion is one that she sees everywhere in her neighborhood. And so for her, it becomes something beautiful that's in her life, and that she learns to celebrate what's around her and the beauty that's around her that may seem, gray to other people, but she's able to take those moments and turn them into really a beautiful life.
I fell in love with the writing just on a couple of sentences or phrases that are excerpted in the Goodreads review. She is described as a gentle woman with, quote, scraps of baffled hate in her, hate with no eyes, no smile, who knows, while people did live, they would be grand, would be glorious and brave, would have nimble hearts that would beat and beat.
Mm-hmm.
Robin, thank you so much for telling us about it.
No, you're very welcome.